27th, 1942. The skies over New Guinea boiled with 40 Japanese aircraft, a swarm of angry hornets slicing through the tropical clouds. On the Allied runway below, 12 American fighters roared to life, engines screaming, propellers flashing in the morning light. The odds were more than 3-1. Inside one of those cockpits sat a 22-year-old farm boy from Wisconsin. His name was Richard Ira Bong. It was his first combat mission. His hands were steady. His eyes were focused. The Japanese had ruled these skies for a year. But within minutes, that farm boy would shoot down 2 enemy fighters. Within 2 years, he would become the most feared pilot in the Pacific. And within 3 years, he'd be dead. But not the way you'd think. This is the story of Richard Bong, the humble, analytical farm boy who revolutionized American fighter tactics, earned the Medal of Honor, and became America's deadliest ace. Port Moresby, New Guinea. The morning heat shimmered on the metal runway. The air smelled of fuel, sweat, and jungle vegetation. Second Lieutenant Bong climbed into his P-38 Lightning, feeling the vibration of twin engines under him. His war was about to begin, not with emotion, but with mathematics. Closure rates, deflection angles, seconds between life and death. The mission briefing was simple. Intercept enemy bombers heading for Allied positions. 12 P-38s against 40 Japanese aircraft. On paper, it looked like suicide. But combat isn't fought on paper. Bong flew as wingman to Captain Thomas Lynch, an experienced pilot who had drilled a single lesson into him. Never dogfight a Zero. The Japanese Zero could turn tighter, climb faster, and twist through the sky like smoke. But it was fragile. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. The P-38 was heavier, tougher, and faster. Its advantage lay in vertical speed and raw power. As the formations merged, Bong spotted a Zero sliding in behind his leader. He didn't panic. He calculated angles, range, closure. He dove from above, engines screaming. At less than 100 yards, close enough to see the enemy pilot's helmet, he pressed the trigger. The P-38's guns erupted. 1 second, 2 seconds. The Zero disintegrated in flame, but there was no time to celebrate. 3 more Zeros dove on him. Standard protocol said climb away. Bong dove toward the jungle. His Lightning tore through the humid air, skimming the treetops so close his wingtips nearly brushed the leaves. 2 Japanese pilots tried to follow and couldn't pull out. They crashed into the green below. Leveling off, Bong saw a Japanese dive bomber pulling out of its run. He moved in, fired a short burst, and the bomber exploded in a fireball. Bong flew through the rising smoke and returned to base. 2 confirmed kills on his first mission. He earned the Silver Star that day. But something far more important began. Japanese pilots reported encountering an American who fought like their own aces. Cold, precise, and impossibly fast. His name, they said, was not yet known. But they would remember his work. Before the war, before the legend, Richard Bong was simply Dick. The oldest of 9 children, growing up under the wide blue skies of Superior, Wisconsin. His father, Carl, and mother, Dora, were Swedish immigrants who believed in hard work and humility. On that quiet farm, Dick learned patience, precision, and observation, the same traits that would later define him in combat. One day in 1928, he looked up and saw airplanes flying over their farm, carrying mail for the president's summer retreat. The sound of those engines changed his life. He built model planes from scrap wood, read aviation magazines until the pages wore thin, and told his family, "Someday I'll fly one of those." He was a good student, quiet but sharp. He hunted deer in the forests, learned to track movement, control his breathing, and wait for the perfect shot. Those habits, discipline, patience, precision, would become the foundation of his aerial marksmanship. In 1938, Bong enrolled in college to study engineering. But when he joined a civilian pilot training program, it became clear where his real future lay. He soloed on his 20th birthday. His instructor said he had extraordinary situational awareness, the ability to track multiple moving objects at once and make split-second decisions. When war broke out, he joined the Army Air Forces. At Luke Field, Arizona, he quickly stood out. His instructor, Barry Goldwater, would later say, "He was the finest natural pilot I ever met." He didn't just fly. He understood the physics of flight. Bong didn't rely on instinct. He relied on calculation. Every maneuver, every adjustment was deliberate. Then came the P-38 Lightning. Twin engines, twin tails. It looked unlike anything else in the sky. It could climb faster and fly farther than most fighters. And its nose-mounted guns meant every bullet traveled straight ahead. Pure precision. Most pilots found it intimidating. Bong fell in love with it. But his confidence sometimes got him in trouble. One day, he buzzed down San Francisco's Market Street so low that laundry blew off clotheslines. General George Kenney called him in. Everyone expected punishment. Instead, Kenney said, "If you didn't want to fly down Market Street, I wouldn't have you in my Air Force. But don't ever do it again." Kenney saw the spark of greatness. When General MacArthur needed the best pilots for the Pacific, Kenney handpicked Bong. The farm boy from Wisconsin was about to meet the war that would make him immortal. When Bong arrived in New Guinea, he joined the 49th Fighter Group. The airfield was nothing more than mud, tents, and mosquitoes. The heat was suffocating, and the jungle seemed to swallow everything. Disease, exhaustion, and enemy raids were constant. Captain Thomas Lynch took Bong under his wing. Lynch was a tactician, not a showman. He taught Bong the one truth that defined survival: never fight the zero on its terms. Use altitude, speed, and surprise. Attack from above, fire once, climb back out. Never slow down. Never turn fight. These were the rules of boom and zoom. Dive like a hawk, strike fast, then vanish into the sky. It sounded simple, but it demanded discipline and nerve. Bong mastered it. He analyzed every engagement like an engineer solving an equation. He learned that most pilots fired too early. He preferred to wait, 50 yards, sometimes less, before squeezing the trigger. At that distance, missing was impossible. In January 1943, Bong flew 2 missions that defined his reputation. On January 7th, he engaged an enemy Oscar fighter in a 5-minute duel. The Japanese pilot was skilled, but Bong refused to play his game. He climbed, dove, and used speed to dictate the fight. When the Oscar turned too sharply, Bong closed to 50 yards and fired. The enemy aircraft disintegrated. The next day, he scored his 5th kill. That made him an ace. In just a few weeks, he had gone from rookie to one of the Pacific's rising stars. By April, he was a double ace with 10 confirmed kills. But Bong wasn't chasing numbers. He was chasing mastery. He studied gun camera footage after every mission, reviewing every second to understand what worked and what didn't. He shared what he learned with new pilots arriving from the States, young men terrified of their first combat. He taught them patience. He taught them the geometry of pursuit. He taught them to attack from the sun, strike fast, and never get drawn into a turning fight. His leadership style was quiet, practical, and deeply human. And his squadron noticed something remarkable. Under his leadership, no wingman ever died. By mid-1943, Bong had become more than a skilled pilot. He was becoming something the Japanese would come to fear. A ghost in the sky, striking from nowhere, and disappearing before anyone could react. The legend of Richard Bong was just beginning. By mid-1943, the skies over New Guinea were still ruled by danger. Every mission was a gamble, every flight a dance with death. But one day in July, everything changed. July 26, 1943. Over New Guinea, the morning sun burned through a haze of mist. Bong led 10 P-38s on patrol when he spotted nearly 20 enemy aircraft below. He could have waited. He could have called for reinforcements. But hesitation wasn't in his nature. He pushed the throttle forward and dove straight into the fight. On the first pass, his guns flared. 2 enemy fighters exploded almost instantly. He climbed back into the clouds, regrouped, then dove again. 15 more Japanese aircraft had joined the battle. The odds were now 3-1, but Bong didn't care. He dove for a second strike, then a third. When the smoke cleared, 10 enemy planes had been destroyed, 4 by Bong himself. Not a single American was lost. For that mission, He received the Distinguished Service Cross, one step below the Medal of Honor, but his real reward was invisible. The enemy now feared him by name. Japanese pilots began whispering about the ghost in the twin-boom fighter. Intelligence. Reports described an American ace with red-painted wingtips who attacked from impossible angles and disappeared before anyone could respond. They called him the Ghost. Imagine what that meant. You're a Japanese pilot, already outnumbered, exhausted, and fighting for survival. And now there's one specific American you're told to avoid if you see his aircraft. That kind of fear spreads faster than fire. By the end of 1943, Bong had 15 confirmed kills. He'd become a national hero back home, though he barely noticed. When letters arrived from Wisconsin filled with newspaper clippings, he laughed them off. He told his family, "I'm just doing my job." To him, every kill was a problem solved, a calculation done right, but even heroes need rest. After a year of non-stop combat, General Kenny ordered Bong back to the United States. He'd become too valuable to lose. America needed living legends, not dead ones. When he stepped off the train in Superior, Wisconsin, the quiet farm boy returned to a hero's welcome. There were parades, speeches, reporters, but Bong hated attention. He'd rather be in the cockpit than behind a microphone. At one college homecoming event, though, something unexpected happened. In the crowd, he saw a young woman smiling at him. Her name was Marjorie Vattendahl. She was beautiful, smart, and graceful, and Bong was immediately captivated. They started talking, and soon they were inseparable. After a year of death and destruction, she was a glimpse of everything normal, everything human. When he had to return to the Pacific, he carried her photograph with him and had it painted on the nose of his P-38. He named the aircraft Marge. Every pilot in the Pacific recognized it, the lightning with the red spinners and the girl's face on the nose. But to Bong, it wasn't decoration. It was a promise. Every time he took off, he saw her eyes staring back at him, reminding him what he was fighting to return to. In early 1944, Bong's victories mounted. He passed 20 kills, then 25. Then came the record that made headlines across America. In April 1944, Bong scored his 27th confirmed victory, surpassing Captain Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26. Rickenbacker himself sent a letter. "You have achieved what I always hoped another American would accomplish. You have become the best of the best." The newspapers called him America's Ace of Aces. Life magazine put him on their cover. He was promoted to major and sent on a national war bond tour, traveling from state to state, shaking hands, giving speeches, helping raise millions for the war effort. But Bong hated the spotlight. In letters to Marge, he wrote, "I belong in a cockpit, not on a stage." He was proud of his country, but every day spent on tour felt like a day stolen from the war. His squadron was still fighting, and he wanted to be with them. When the tour ended, he got his wish. In September 1944, Bong returned to the Pacific, this time as an instructor at 5th Air Force Headquarters. On paper, his job was to teach tactics, not to fight, but orders like that were flexible. He wasn't allowed to seek combat, but if combat found him, well, that was another matter. And somehow combat always found him. The Philippines campaign was underway. Japanese resistance was fierce. The skies were filled with chaos, fighters, bombers, and now, for the first time, kamikazes. Bong led patrols, taught new pilots, and every so often quietly added another victory to his growing total. 28, 30, 35. He was methodical as ever. Each engagement lasted seconds. His gun camera film showed the same pattern every time. He'd dive from above, fire for 2 or 3 seconds at a range so close you could count the rivets on the enemy plane, then climb away before anyone could counterattack. 2 seconds. That was his signature. As his total climbed higher, General Kenny and General MacArthur began to worry. America needed its ace alive. Kenny reduced Bong's missions, limiting his flights to training and patrols. But they both knew Bong wouldn't stop until he hit 40. By December 1944, the entire 5th Air Force was watching his score. 38, 39, And then came the day that would make him immortal. December 12th, 1944. The tropical sun blazed over Tacloban Airfield. Troops stood in formation. Cameras rolled. General Douglas MacArthur stepped forward wearing his trademark sunglasses and khaki uniform. In his hand, he held the Medal of Honor. MacArthur's voice was clear. Major Richard Ira Bong, who has ruled the air from New Guinea to the Philippines, I now induct you into the society of the bravest of the brave. He pinned the medal on Bong's chest. Newsreels across America showed the moment. The modest farm boy stood stiffly, clearly uncomfortable as the general made him a legend. 5 days later, Bong scored his 40th and final aerial victory. The mission was textbook Bong. He had altitude advantage, sun behind him, perfect position. He dove, fired a 2-second burst, and the enemy aircraft vanished in flame. Kill number 40. No celebration, no cheers. Just another flight done right. He radioed in calmly, returning to base. When he landed, his squadron knew history had been made. 40 victories, more than any American pilot ever. General MacArthur and Kenny had already made their decision. Bong would go home. He'd done more than enough. He had nothing left to prove. The night before he left the Pacific, he walked the flight line one last time, running his hand over the metal skin of a P-38 Lightning. Hundreds of missions, hundreds of hours, dozens of dogfights. And through it all, he had never lost a wingman. Not once, he told his men. Take care of each other. Don't take stupid risks. Get home. Then he boarded a transport plane and left the war behind. When he landed back in the United States, the war was still raging. But for Richard Bong, combat was over. He was 24 years old. He had earned every medal a man could earn. He had become the ace of aces. And for the first time in years, he was finally going home. January 1945. The war was still raging overseas, but for Major Richard Ira Bong, the fighting was finally over. After 3 relentless years of combat, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin came home a hero. The newspapers called him America's Ace of Aces. Parades followed him wherever he went. Radio programs begged for interviews. People wanted to shake the hand of the man who'd beaten Japan's best. But Bong wasn't interested in fame. All he wanted was peace, and her. On February 10, 1945, in a small church in Superior, Wisconsin, he married the woman whose picture had flown on the nose of his fighter plane. Marjorie Fattendahl. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt, and overflowing with joy. Hundreds came to see them, neighbors, friends, reporters, soldiers home from war. They filled the church until people stood in the aisles. For one day, the horrors of war faded, and the nation's deadliest ace became just a man in love. Marge wore a simple white gown. Bong wore his Air Force's uniform, his Medal of Honor shining quietly on his chest. When they exchanged vows, he promised her a life far from danger, far from war. The crowd erupted in applause, the band played, and for the first time in years, Richard Bong smiled without worry. Their honeymoon took them to California, where Bong had accepted a new job. He was going to be a test pilot for Lockheed Aircraft, a dream assignment for someone who lived to fly. The P-38 Lightning had made him famous, but now he would help test the future, jet aircraft. The war was nearly over, but aviation was just beginning to change forever. The new plane was the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. Sleek, silver, fast, nearly 600 miles per hour. No propellers, just the shriek of pure jet thrust. Bong was fascinated. He studied every system, every gauge, every manual. He treated it the same way he treated combat, analytically, patiently, methodically. But jets were dangerous. The technology was new and unpredictable. Engines flamed out. Fuel pumps failed. Every flight carried risk. Bong knew it, but he wasn't afraid. He'd faced worse in the Pacific skies, and this, he thought, was progress. He and Marge moved into a small home in North Hollywood, a quiet neighborhood lined with orange trees. They planned a future, children, a home of their own, maybe even a career in aviation engineering. After everything he'd survived, the future finally seemed real. Then came August 6, 1945. That morning, Bong kissed Marge goodbye and drove to the Lockheed facility in Burbank for a routine acceptance flight. It was a clear California afternoon. He climbed into the cockpit of P-80A, tail number 4485048, and went through the checklist like always. Everything looked perfect. The engine whined to life, high-pitched and smooth. He radioed the tower, received clearance, and rolled down the runway at 2:30 p.m. Witnesses said the takeoff was flawless. The jet climbed quickly, its silver fuselage gleaming in the sun. Then, just seconds later, black smoke puffed from the tail. The engine sputtered. Bong leveled the wings, trying to recover. The canopy flew off. He decided to eject. The jet rolled, nose down, and Bong parachuted clear, but he was too low. At barely 200 feet, the parachute didn't have time to open fully. Bong hit the ground hard, near the intersection of Oxnard Street and Satsuma Avenue. He died instantly. Moments later, the jet crashed and exploded in a ball of flame. He was 24 years old, married for 6 months. The man who had survived hundreds of combat missions was gone, killed not by an enemy bullet, but by mechanical failure over friendly soil. That same day, halfway around the world, the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. 2 headlines shared the front page the next morning. Atomic bomb destroys Japanese city, and beneath it, America's ace of aces killed in test flight. The cruel symmetry stunned the nation. The war's end was now certain, but its greatest hero would never see it. For Marge Bong, the news was unbearable. Officers came to her door that afternoon. She opened it smiling, expecting her husband home for dinner. Instead, they handed her a telegram. In an instant, her world collapsed. Years later, she said, "Dick survived everything the Japanese threw at him. He came home to me." And then, in one moment, he was gone. His funeral was held in Poplar, Wisconsin. Thousands came. Soldiers in dress uniform, generals, pilots who'd flown with him, old farmers who'd watched him grow up. General Kenny stood silently by the casket, tears in his eyes. The sound of taps drifted over the small cemetery. Overhead, a formation of P-38 Lightnings passed by, one plane pulling up sharply, leaving an empty space in the sky. The missing man, the town buried its hero, but America never forgot him. Newspapers across the country carried his photograph, a young man smiling shyly beside the woman he loved. The greatest ace America had ever produced, gone at 24. In the years after his death, pilots spoke of Bong with a mix of awe and sorrow. Chuck Yeager, the man who would later break the sound barrier, said, "Bong's death hit harder than most. He was supposed to survive. He had earned survival. The Japanese called him the Ghost, and even they mourned his passing." One former Zero pilot wrote years later, "He fought us with honor. We feared him, but we respected him." Yet Bong's story didn't end in that California field. His influence rippled forward, through tactics, through training, through every American fighter school that taught his methods. His lessons became doctrine. Energy management, altitude advantage, patience over recklessness, precision over panic. His gunnery techniques, his boom and zoom philosophy, his rule of never losing a wingman. They became the foundation of modern fighter training. Even decades later, when jet pilots flew at supersonic speeds, instructors still quoted him, "Get close, fire short, keep your wingman alive." His name was carved into textbooks. His story told to every new generation of flyers. In Wisconsin, the town of Superior renamed its airport in his honor, the Richard Ira Bong Airport. Later, a museum opened, the Richard Ira Bong Veterans Historical Center, filled with his letters, his medals, and a restored P-38 Lightning painted just like Marge, red spinners gleaming under the sun. His sister said, "He made the world believe that quiet boys from small towns can do extraordinary things." And in 2024, 80 years after his final flight in combat, history gave up one last secret. Deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, a team of researchers found the wreckage of Marge, the original P-38 he had flown. The plane lay half buried under vines and soil, its red paint still faintly visible after 8 decades. For his family, it was closure. For the world, it was a reminder. Richard Bong's record, 40 confirmed kills, 0 wingmen lost, has never been broken. It probably never will. Modern warfare doesn't allow for it. But numbers aren't what made him great. It was his method, his mind, his humanity. He proved that discipline could defeat aggression, that preparation could beat instinct, that leadership was about bringing everyone home alive. He was more than an ace. He was a teacher in the sky. After Richard's death, Marge carried on. For years, she kept his memory alive, not through grief, but through gratitude. She spoke at schools, visited veterans' hospitals, and helped build a memorial in Superior. She wanted young people to understand that heroes aren't born in glory. They're built in silence, through discipline, humility, and doing what's right when no one is watching. In every story she told, she made sure to remind listeners that Richard Bong wasn't just a soldier. He was a son, a husband, a man who believed in precision and patience more than bravado. She lived her life with quiet dignity, the same way he had lived his. Marge passed away in 2003, but before she left, she made sure his legacy would never fade. The Richard Ira Bong Veterans Historical Center opened its doors that same year, a place where his medals, letters, and even the replica of his P-38 Lightning stand frozen in time. If you walk through that museum today, you'll see the smile of a young man in uniform, a boy from Wisconsin who learned to fly and never stopped learning. You'll see the love letters between him and Marge, written in careful, neat handwriting. You'll see a pair of worn leather gloves, the ones he used on his very last mission, and you'll realize he wasn't chasing fame or records. He was chasing excellence. His story carries lessons that still matter. Preparation always beats talent. Fundamentals. Win when chaos begins. Discipline is stronger than aggression. True leadership means bringing your team home alive. Humility and greatness can live in the same heart, and mastery, real mastery, isn't about glory. It's about control, focus, and respect for the craft. Richard Bong taught all that without ever writing a manual. He taught it by living it. He never lost a wingman, never fired carelessly, never took a life for pride. He just did his job perfectly. If he were alive today, maybe he'd smile at all the stories told about him. Maybe he'd shrug and say, "I just wanted to do it right," and that's what made him unforgettable. He was born on September 24th, 1920. He died on August 6th, 1945, 40. Confirmed victories, 0 wingmen lost. 1 legend that time could never erase. The next time you hear the distant hum of an aircraft engine, look up. Somewhere in that endless blue, there's still a whisper of the ace of aces, the farm boy who ruled the skies and proved that greatness doesn't shout, it just flies.